As a pheasant, we've been sent a very exciting lens by the lovely folk at PERGEAR. Here's one you made earlier.
Ta-da!
So this is a 60mm f2.8 macro lens native to the Z mount. It's made for lots of other mounts as well, but we're gonna try it out and see what we think.
Yeah, what's interesting about this lens is 2:1 reproduction, which not many lenses have. And the price. So we're gonna tell you all about this. Stick with us. Specifications time. Okay, so all the stuff you like, 10 elements in 7 groups, 10 diaphragm blades, 600-gram weight, all the good things, 19cm focusing distance, close focusing distance, which will give you that sweet 2:1 reproduction rate. Now, it feels robust, the focusing feels smooth, the aperture ring is declicked, which is maybe for you photographers, you may not like that, but for videographers, the declicked aperture is the thing. What's interesting to me that effectively, it has an internal zoom. However, you can see the elements moving inside. When you focus at the closest focusing distance, you can see that element inside the lens actually moves forward. But effectively, they could design a lens that was going to be that big and then to extend itself. I think having it this way is actually a better way because then you're protecting the moving elements within the shell, but it's interesting regardless. And then also what you have at the front is that rectangle frame. The lens doesn't come with a lens hood, so I assume this rectangle frame helps to eliminate a bit of flare. Couple of things to mention. First one is flare. It's a multi-coated lens and there's a good amount of flare suppression, but it is still there. It's not going to be nice and colorful, but it will make your image quite low contrast. So just keep that in mind. It is there, it is multi-coated lens. Now, another thing I want to mention is focus breathing. There's a huge amount of focus breathing, so I wouldn't really recommend this lens for video use unless you just focus on the subject and just keep filming it. But if you want to shift your focus between subject at the front and subject at the back, you will see that actually the focal distance will change quite dramatically because of that.
When testing this lens, we found a couple of interesting things about it. The first is that the lens actually focuses beyond infinity. So pretty much everything is in focus if you set the lens to 1 meter. Everything beyond 1 meter is in focus. If you then carry on turning the focus ring, then everything goes out of focus. While this is something that we see quite a lot with newcomer manufacturers, if you take into account the cost of these new lenses, being as cheap as they are, it's not totally surprising that there have to be some corners cut, and it's just worth bearing in mind. Now, Con also mentioned this frame here around the front of the lens. We assume that's to help handle flare because there is no lens hood provided with this lens, but actually it does prove to cause quite a lot of vignetting. So if you're shooting between the closest focusing distance and about mid-range, most of the time you don't see it. You might see a little bit of vignetting, but you don't see it as an actual frame. When you shoot at infinity though, you do see it. It is actually quite thick black lines around the frame. And I would say that means that the lens is fine for macro and for mid-range work, but don't expect it to be a general purpose lens. Essentially, it's an affordable lens for close-up photography, and that's what it does well. What do we think about the PERGEAR 60mm f2.8 for Nikon Z?
Okay, it's £150. That's what you need to think of when you're considering this lens. So you can't really compare it, let's say, with 50MC Z mount lens, native one, you know, because the other one has always focused much smaller and sharper and better. But if you're not a macro photographer like me, you know, so then you can just pay £150 for dedicated lens for macro and be done with it. But there's a lot of corners that have been cut, which is fine for £150, but it would be, let's say, £500. I would definitely hope that something better would be achieved under that price.
That's right. I mean, if you are just doing macro to, say, mid-range portraiture, it does produce nice pictures. It does have very dreamy bokeh. It's got 10 aperture blades, which means that you get this lovely circular bokeh, which is nice for certain things. Just wouldn't take it out as a general purpose lens. I tend to use my macro lenses for a bit of everything. My 50mm macro is the only 50 that I have. For example, the 105 I've used for stuff other than macro as well. So this lens is a little bit of a one-trick pony, but for 140, 150 pounds. One thing I will say though is I'd highly recommend it as a DX lens for the simple reason that when you put it on, let's say a Z30, Z50 or a ZFC, you're going to end up with a 90mm macro lens and you will eliminate all that vignetting that you get when you shoot at infinity. So if you are one of those smaller camera bodies users, this is a really nice setup.
Yeah, and the more lenses we have from all manufacturers at different price levels, the merrier. If you found this video useful, give us a like and subscribe.
And thank you to PERGEAR for sending us this lens to test out.